Hi, today
Wait,
I'm
no,
gonna...
no, I'm still filming everybody.
I was ready.
There are 6 people. Okay.
Okay. Today I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of releasing prisoners early due to COVID. So the first thing is we need to limit the spread of COVID. We've obviously known that with all these quarantines and stuff. So one of the things we've been asked is to social distance. This is a lot harder to do in prisons since they're like confined to like their cells and they have like bunk beds and they share the showers and the toilets and everything. So there's a lot of not social distancing in the prisons. They've also talked about a vaccine that they've created for COVID. They've talked about giving it to prisoners as a trial run first to see if it's actually effective since they're more at risk for catching the virus. So don't know how I feel about that, but I mean, if they want to trial run on prisoners, like, I guess they can. They've also had protesters recently in other states wanting to release prisoners early. They do have a compassionate release that they can apply for. There's like all these restrictions though that they have to meet in order to be released on compassionate release. Some of these can be like cancer or having a terminal illness or just any part of dying. They usually won't release you unless you're gonna die or you are close to being released on your sentence. This quote says, compared with the general population, the number of COVID cases is 5.5 times higher among people who are incarcerated. That's from the MacMod of 2020. And this kind of makes sense that it's higher than our rate just because they're in close quarters and there's like a lot of people in these prisons. So the one thing I want to talk about is the environments in the prisons. So again, with the social distancing, they can't really do that. And they've also, they have really poor personal hygiene in prisons. So they actually are not given a lot of like bedding to like change constantly or clothing or like hand sanitizer and like body wash and stuff. Like they're very limited on that stuff. And so during a virus, it's harder to keep everything clean if they are already being supplied less of that stuff. Another thing is with the environments to be safer and actually work for the COVID, they would have to release enough people to maintain that social distancing, which would be a lot of people, and I don't know how they would choose who can go and who can't. However, they say for prioritized release for the compassionate immunocompromised people can be released on that. Also, nonviolent crimes, drug crimes can be released, but they don't really like releasing drug criminals. I don't know why. Also, people who have failure to place bail can also be released too, but they haven't been releasing those people either. So another quote is, during this outbreak, stories have emerged of inmates producing hand sanitizer and personal protective equipment while themselves are barred from possessing it. They are washing potentially infected laundry from the institution and local schools and hospitals, and even digging graves for COVID-19 victims in preparation for the anticipated waves of deaths. And that's from the Montoya 2020. There have also been stories about them not getting their personal phone calls, or they've moved them into different cells where they don't know where other people are because they're not allowing them to come out during like all together at certain times. So if one of their friends dies in another cell, they cannot know about that unless those people in that cell tell other people. So the communication in these prisons are very bad. They also have stopped allowing other people to come in and prepare the meals, and so they are doing it themselves. And if a person who is infected with COVID that they don't know about is preparing and serving the food until they get their results back. It makes it spread a lot faster that way. So they're not really testing a lot either, so that's kind of harder for them to know whether or not they're spreading it faster. They're not really taking precautions, so that's really hard because of the environment. Another reason is criminals are lawbreakers. They're there for a reason. I mean, why wouldn't they be? They've either gone to court or, went through the proper things to be incriminalized. So why should we release them? If they're breaking the laws already, what makes them think that they're not going to obey the quarantine directives if we do release them? For example, they've released a couple of people. One inmate in Florida got released and murdered somebody the next day. And then a California inmate was released and 40 minutes later he hijacked a car. So the people that they are releasing kind of are still causing crimes and stuff, so they don't necessarily want to release more people to cause more crimes, because our police force and everybody claims that there has been a higher crime rate since COVID, and that has not been because of them releasing people, but they don't want it to get higher because they release criminals. They are also wondering if it's time to rethink crime and punishment, mostly just with the drug laws and like rape laws and stuff. Another quote is, if prison is designed to send someone a message and have given them skills they need, and they've learned their lesson, and you determine that they're not going to pose as a threat anymore, perhaps it's time to free an open cell for somebody who richly deserves it. And that's the Johnson 2020. We've also I looked into people that if they do get released and they're not violent or anything, like if they are domestically violent, they're less of a threat, and so they'll release them. But if they do release them, then they go back to their wives and their families and stuff, and so it's like destroying those types of relationships too if they release people. And those are the types of people that they probably would release first, because they're not mass murderers and they kind of are just taking up space. So we definitely don't want to release them and cause more harm to more families. So yeah, but then on the other side of that, we think leaving people in prison is more of a death sentence, because if we release inmates, it kind of doesn't protect the public and health and our safety. But at the same time, if we leave them in there and they're immunocompromised, then we're just giving them a death sentence. Because of people in the prisons and their so because of people in prisons and their compassionate release, trying to get compassionate release, they've actually stopped looking into the applications of that, because they don't want to release people back, and that's their job to actually look at the compassionate release requests. And so for them to not look at it also causes a big issue of whether or not they actually care to release anybody and protect people's safety. They've actually determined that thousands of inmates have actually died because of the virus, and so that's been really hard on families. Another quote is, it says that he was obese, asthmatic, and needed 2 inhalers, but prosecutors claimed in court that he was actually much safer behind bars than he would be if he was released. And that's the Blinkinger 2020. I don't necessarily agree with that. I feel like if you need 2 inhalers, like being in prison is not going to be safer than being outside of prison. Another quote is, about 10,000 people incarcerated in federal prisons are older than 60 years old, and a third of those people have underlying conditions that increase the risk of catching COVID and dying. And that's from the Rita Rubin 2020. So being left in prison, and you can have a death sentence if you have immunocompromised. The last thing is releasing inmates causes a big distribution with public health and safety guidelines. And so prisons are a public threat to us because just because the people that work there are being affected by the people that are in there, but also like they're coming back into society, so they're bringing whatever is in the prison outside. So we can't keep what's in the prison not out of the public. A quote from that is, when it comes to highly infectious viruses that causes COVID-19, what happens in correctional facilities does not stay in correctional facilities because staff members as well as incarcerated individuals come and go. And that's the Rita Rubin 2020 also. Another quote is, truly, there are bad guys in prison, but the vast majority of people in prisons and jails are not what the media makes us think about. They're not mass murderers, and that's the Rabin 2020. There was a big project that they've been doing since COVID started. It's called the Marshall Project, and you can actually look per state in the US, like how many prisoners have died, how many prisoners have actually got the virus and lived, and how many people of the correctional officers. So you can go look in that, because I looked at the Utah one, and we've actually had no prisoners die or correctional officers, so we're doing pretty good. And yeah, that's the end of my speech.
What class was that for?
Communications.
Nice.